There we go. I'm going to try that one more time. I switched it onto a different monitor, and then I accidentally clicked outside of the browser window itself. Okay, so here's Antarctica. At the South Pole is where this is rotating around, and there's this stretch of land that extends off of Antarctica. And it turns out that on this Google Earth image, it shows the boundary of where land and water meets. That's the way that Google Earth portrays things. But it turns out that most all of this where there's water is actually an ice shelf that extends out into the ocean. So on land, there's very thick glacier, and that glacier runs off of land and into the ocean. And so there's a huge amount of ice that is glacial ice in the Southern Ocean or the Antarctic Ocean. And once in a while, a large piece of that ice shelf will break off as a glacier or as an iceberg. And there's an iceberg. It was called A68, and its location was like right here on that map. And it broke off in 2017. This iceberg is between the size of the state of Rhode Island and the state of Delaware. This iceberg is larger than the state of Rhode Island. It's about 1.5 trillion tons of ice. It was an extraordinarily large break. It's considered to be the largest iceberg that has ever broken free of any piece of land and floated out into the ocean. So that happened in 2017, a little over 3 years ago, because it was in, it broke free in August, and then in September of 2017, it started floating. And it started floating toward the north. Well, everything's toward the north from the South Pole. And as it began to float, it floated out and away and began heading toward the equator. So this is South America here, and got heading up like in this kind of direction. And why the iceberg moves, of course, is due to ocean currents. So you can see these different links in the current week plan. Show you what I mean. So in the plan for this week, which is both in the Chapter 7 and Chapter 8 folder, I put some links here. It says location of iceberg, or the 2007 Breakaway. So this link for 2007 Breakaway has a short video that describes the breakaway of the iceberg. It's not very long at all. Let's see if this will load okay. Our web connection gets a little bit slow toward the end of the day, I've noticed.
The ice shelf has grown rapidly in recent weeks. Just 12 miles of frozen material is keeping this enormous iceberg from drifting away into the sea. Collapsing ice shelves are not uncommon in Antarctica. As these pictures show, these fragmentations can dramatically affect the landscape, creating icebergs of all shapes and sizes. A team of British researchers have been travelling down to Antarctica to monitor the growing crack in the Larsen C ice shelf for several years. But they have been surprised by the dramatic expansion in the rift that's taken place in just 2 weeks in December.
What we've found is that the rift that's been in there in this ice shelf for a number of years has broken through another 18 kilometres and is now at risk of giving birth to an iceberg about a quarter the size of Wales. And the significance of that is that it's a very large iceberg that will go out into the open ocean, but also that the remaining ice shelf, we believe, will be less stable than before the rift was there.
When large icebergs break off the edge of an ice shelf like the Larsen B in 2002, it can have a dramatic effect on the stability of the entire structure. At Larsen B, most of the remaining shelf disintegrated in less than a month. Experts at the British Antarctic Survey are worried that any new iceberg formation could have long-term consequences.
When the ice shelf loses this ice, it may then start to collapse. And if that were to occur, then the glaciers that feed the ice shelf could flow faster and contribute more to sea level rise over the next few decades.
When it shears away, the new iceberg will be one of the biggest ever recorded, around 50 times the size of Manhattan Island. But despite concerns about the impacts of global warming, researchers say they have no evidence that climate change is playing any significant role in the new iceberg's formation. Matt McGrath, BBC News.
Okay, so that was a little story about the Breakaway. And this link has photos of the Breakaway. That's the one that I just mentioned. So this is an article from 2017. You can see here where the rift that we say is where the iceberg comes free. And there's a couple different reasons why the iceberg could break free. It turns out that the sea ice floats in the ocean, but so does this. And it turns out that it could be that this part of the iceberg is more or less buoyant than this part, and it ends up snapping like vertically. The other reason that it can end up breaking free is that there are currents or waves. Well, first off, waves can impinge on or hit this iceberg, and or is this part of the glacier as it floats in the ocean. And as the waves hit it, it causes it to bounce up and down vertically, and that can break it free. But then the general motion of the iceberg as it floats away from land is as a result of currents. So here it's clear that the current is heading like kind of toward this direction, toward the right in that image, or toward the upper right as the piece breaks away. So this is a story about, it's from September 2017, showing a photograph on August 1st, 2017, and September 25th, 2017. And you might be like, oh, that's not very far at all. But this gap here is many, many, many miles. It's something like 12 miles from here to here. This is just a colossal iceberg. So that's that link. And then location, breakaway, photo breakaway. Okay, so here's a quick overview of what the iceberg looks like now. This was just from, let's see, December 9th, just a couple days ago. Okay, so the video mentioned that it's heading toward an island called South Georgia Island. All right, so here's the deal. This is Antarctica, and this is the southern tip of South America, down here, the southern tip of Chile. And off the coast of South America, so like down here, there's the Falkland Islands, which are just to the east. But then even further off, there's this island here called South Georgia Island. It's called South Georgia and the South Sandwich Islands. And this island is a territory of England. So it's British territory. And South Georgia Island used to be an incredibly important island for the whaling industry. It wasn't that long ago that we used to harvest whales from the ocean in order to get whale oil. And the whale oil is used to light lamps and as a fuel for all kinds of different things. Now whale oil is not really like a thing. We don't really hunt whales very much. But this red dot is the current location of that iceberg. So that iceberg has drifted from here all the way up to this location. And it was always a possibility that the iceberg could hit some islands or land. There's an island here, and it missed those islands. But now, not only is it very close to South Georgia Island, but the direction of the current and the direction of the winds is actually forcing it towards South Georgia Island. So it has taken 3 years for the iceberg to travel from this location up to here. And sometimes the direction and speed of the current and the winds makes it drift relatively slow. Let me show you what the current activity of, I put another link here, it's motion on earth.nullschool.net, except you have to like manually do this. So we'll go down to the location where South George Island is and turn on the current. So we go to ocean, currents, and overlay the current. So South George Island is right here. This is the location where the iceberg broke off, was down here, and it drifted up in this direction. Its initial drift velocity was relatively low. You can see on this image here that there's not very bright colors because the currents were relatively slow. But now that it's up over here where South George Island is, it turns out that the current speed and direction is much greater. So the drift speed recently in the last month has been very high because the glacier was caught up in this current, and the current continues to head to the east. And it was looking like the direction that it would travel. Hold on a second here. I almost lost it. There we go. It looked like the direction it was traveling was going to take it on a more southerly path and get caught in this current and head it back down south, well, toward the bottom of this map. But it turns out it's a little bit further north than it was expected to be at this point, or a little bit up on this map, because north and south is tough to talk about when you're down near the South Pole. And it looks as if the iceberg is actually on a collision course for South George Island. And that's kind of exciting because this is an incredibly large iceberg that could run into a very large island. And because it's so big, the front edge of the iceberg could hit the island, and the backside of the iceberg could still be caught up in that current, which could tear the iceberg apart and push more of the ice up onto land. And it's also possible that it could drive a large portion of the iceberg up onto land. South George Island is actually a very interesting island because it was used for the whaling industry. There are some old whaling communities, like up here where it says Stromness. I don't know if this is going to be able to zoom in any further. Yeah, they were like whaling outposts. So they're places with a deep enough port where ships could get into, and most of these places are now abandoned. But these locations were where whales that were harvested from the ocean would be brought up by ship, and it's kind of gross and weird and disgusting, but the fat and blubber from the whale would be rendered down to make oil. And it turns out these tanks are for storing whale oil, and most of those tanks have now rusted out and corroded and fallen in. So the places that used to be inhabited were mostly on the northern side of South George Island, and where this iceberg could hit is on the southern side of South George Island. But all around the island, there's all sorts of different kinds of sea life. Let me show you this. This is like just a few minutes long. We're not going to watch all of it, but very briefly at the beginning, the narrator talks about the past of South Georgia Island. Here it says Resurrection Island because they're talking about the penguin population making a resurgence. And actually, like the last 2 minutes.
In one of the world's largest king penguin colonies, chicks must be able to make it through the winter without food. This chick can expect one of three fates: be eaten alive, starve to death, or hang on one more day until their parents return with food. And here they are. Look at all their bellies. They're all stuffed. How is it possible that life can come back from the dead? The island of South Georgia was the scene of one of the worst wildlife massacres in history. Species driven to near extinction, the whaling stations were abandoned. This is an awe-inspiring story of of how, if given the chance, nature can bounce back on a scale you're not going to believe. My name's Bertie Gregory and I'm a National Geographic wildlife filmmaker. This is Resurrection Island. Less than 100 years ago, the penguins of South Georgia were being used as kindling for whaling station fires. But now, we've finally made it to St Andrews Bay, you know, the busiest beach on the planet. It's funny, when you read about king penguins on paper, you know, you read they dive to 300 meters, 1,000 feet in some of the roughest ocean in the world. And then they come back to here, this kind of blizzard, snow-covered mountainous island to breed. And you meet them and they're just totally unfazed. Hello. Some of these adults might not have set foot on land for 5 months to see their chicks. And with a belly full of fish, that's no easy task. The worst part is over. Just a nice stroll to find the kids. Great, a blubbery roadblock of elephant seals. You ready? Ready. Here we go. 400,000 king penguins. I mean, my hometown has less people than that. Wait.
Okay, we're not going to watch the whole thing, but I invite you to watch the rest of that link, and you can watch other videos about South Georgia Island. But you can see here that in at this shore, there are places where the water and the land meet, and it's very, very vertical. So if the iceberg is shoved up against here, and I'm not saying this would be the location the iceberg would hit, but if the iceberg is shoved up against that land, it would push up against that land there and just kind of like stop. But if the iceberg or large portions of the iceberg are pushed into this bay and override the land, that dramatically can affect the breeding ground for the penguins. It can make it difficult for land, barely audible, make it difficult for whales, or not whales, but like penguins and walruses and stuff to get out to their feeding ground. So it's not necessarily certain where the iceberg will hit, or it could possibly even miss, but it could affect land. Anyway, in this little documentary, at one point about 100 years ago, there were about only 10,000 emperor penguins. They'd been hunted to not near extinction, but down to about 10,000. And now there are about 400,000 individuals. And this is just a whole sea of penguins that come in. And what they mentioned there, and you can see in the video, what's remarkable, is it takes about a year to raise a penguin. So a pair of penguins will raise one baby penguin each year, but whenever they need to get food to feed the babies, they go out into the water, and then they eat lots and lots of fish, kind of fill their stomach with fish, and then they come back and they actually regurgitate that food for the baby. And sometimes individual penguins will be gone for 5 months straight to get sufficient food to sustain themselves and have excess to come back and feed the babies. So the young penguins can stand there just for months on end waiting for their parents to come back, and they're fed by only their parents exactly. Anyway, that's an interesting place on the earth. It has a very long history, but I just wanted to make sure that you're aware, and it's probably going to be on the news because that survey of the location was just completed. It costs a lot of money because if you can see this, you can see the iceberg by satellite, but what's better than that is to be able to overfly it. So you take a flight from South America, you head out, you video and audio, or videotape and photograph the iceberg in its location. They dropped devices down onto it that are GPS trackers to be able to send back the location by satellite. And with that information, along with current information, you're able to determine the path or the track of the iceberg. So that's a big iceberg. It's a tremendously huge iceberg. So that link is here, this Life on South Georgia Island, and you can read about other things about Georgia Island. The only other thing that I didn't get to talk about yesterday is that tsunami which hit in Japan in 2011 not only did damage in areas, coastal areas like fishing villages and other kinds of cities, but in the northern end of Japan, on the just a few miles away from where the earthquake took place, one of the pieces on land that was actually the closest to the earthquake itself, which caused the tsunami, there's a nuclear power plant called the Fukushima Daiichi Nuclear Power Plant. And it turns out to be the worst nuclear disaster in human history, and it happened just 9 years ago. Much worse than the 3 Mile Island or Chernobyl disaster of the past. And it all was because of inundation of the tsunami at the nuclear power plant. The nuclear power plant was right on the coast. And when the tsunami hit the power plant, it did irreparable damage, and it caused explosions at the plant and meltdowns at the reactor. So this is a good example of how, we understand how and where tsunami can take place. And it's clear that the location of this nuclear power plant was put right on the shore, exactly at a place where not only a tsunami could hit, but more than probably would hit. And yet the power plant was placed in that location, really taking a gamble. There's a huge roll of the dice, and the gamble was lost really by humankind, because when the tsunami hit, it caused irreparable damage and terrible disaster at the power plant. So here's a quick story about that.
Earthquake and tsunami in Japan. The disaster triggered another crisis, a meltdown at the Fukushima Nuclear Power Plant. More than 160,000 people fled the region along Japan's northern coast, and many have never returned. CBS's Ramy Inocencio was given rare access to the ghostly restricted area surrounding the Fukushima plant.
No, this isn't Fukushima in 2011. This is Japan's radiation-devastated region now. People are allowed to pass through quickly, but still not allowed to live here.
The beeping you're hearing is my dosimeter going off. It's telling me we're getting exposed to 10 times the normal amount of radiation. We are in the no-go zone outside the nuclear power plant. People haven't been allowed to live here for the past 9 years, and buildings still look like this.
In 2011, more than 18,000 people were killed after a tremendous 9.0 earthquake unleashed a towering 50-foot tsunami, triggering meltdowns in 3 reactors that cut power and water to millions. Maintenance and cleanup continue to this day, with the ruined reactors encased in new containment shields to wall off radiation. Tokyo Electric Power, or TEPCO, which still runs the plant, granted CBS News rare access to show progress being made. We geared up from socks to vests and our own personal radiation counters. We had our baseline radiation levels checked to compare with when we leave, then headed out to the site of the world's worst nuclear catastrophe since Chernobyl.
We're about 100 times normal background radiation. TEPCO employees say that this is safe as long as we don't stay here very long.
This past week, a new movie about Fukushima was released in time for this anniversary, retelling a disaster that needed little to dramatize further. robots are only just starting to survey damage done. Lethal radiation is still generated by melted fuel inside, but a technological cleanup is decades away. Another problem is political. Water needed to cool the reactors is building up and space is running out. It's a not in my backyard anxiety. More than 1,000 tanks hold more than 1.2 million tons of tainted water. That can fill nearly 500 Olympic-sized swimming pools. The most pressing question now is what to do with all of this treated water. TEPCO says the most realistic option is to release all of it into the ocean and that it's safe. Kenji Abe, who toured us around, is Fukushima Daiichi's public relations manager. We're thoroughly inspecting fish and can confirm there's no fishery contamination, he says. And if we precisely follow national regulations on diluting water when disposing of it, there won't be any problems.
It'd be perfectly fine to do what we call a controlled, monitored release.
American nuclear expert Lake Barrett agrees. He oversaw the U.S.'s 3 Mile Island nuclear accident and says Japan's emotions still run high.
People are basically healing themselves from the emotion of the accident. There is distrust. People feel we call harmful rumors that people might not eat the fish, and there would be those concerns.
And with Japan hosting the Summer Olympics this year, the torch relay is scheduled to begin in the country just minutes away from the nuclear plant. What do you tell people who are nervous about coming to Japan? Fukushima will be in the spotlight, says Abe. We want to welcome visitors with the credo of safety first. We're proceeding step by step toward decommissioning. I want visitors to be assured of our steady, clear progress made so far towards that goal. But that goal will remain elusive for a generation to come. With the burden of this historic cleanup and a trauma of the past, few countries will ever know. For CBS This Morning Saturday, Remy Inocencio, Fukushima, Japan.
Okay, so that story, they mentioned about the Olympics being there this summer. That story was on the news the day after we closed in the spring. If you remember, like, we closed school on March 13th, and then this story was on March 14th. And obviously there weren't any Olympics in Japan this summer. So that part of the story is not right because COVID happened. But I mean, one of the things I want you to get a sense of in this course is that, like, when we talk about oceanography, it's not just the idea that, oh, there's this ocean and there's the water, but everything dealing with the ocean is involved with land as well. And what we do on land affects the ocean. What happens in the ocean affects us on land. They talked in the story about, like, the fisheries. So because the nuclear power plant is literally right on the water here, I'll share the image again. So this is, like, in that part of the story. Like, right here, this is the ocean, and that's the nuclear power plant right there. So the tsunami, as it just ran in, the tsunami just straight up hit right at sea level, the power plant. All of this stuff back here, this used to be other industrial areas and homes and stuff. These are now just all these storage tanks where they store radioactive water. There's some serious issues of the fact that the power plant is located right on the ocean, and as the nuclear fuel continues to generate heat, you have to continue to cool it, and the water acts as a moderator to keep the reactor from going critical and blowing up like a huge bomb. But the problem is the reactor buildings were damaged so much that contaminated water wants to leak out. And typically the water would not be contaminated and you recycle it in a closed loop. But as they need water to continue to cool the plant, that contaminated water then has to be stored. And that's why all these tanks are being built. And this was from March. There's even more tanks. They just constantly are building more and more tanks and storing more and more of that radioactive water. The threat and the risk is that radioactive water will be directly released into the ocean, and the level of radioactivity in the ocean here will be very high, and that could affect the local fishery, which is like any kind of like living sea life that happens to be in the water. Okay, so that was kind of like a sad Debbie Downer story, I guess. But the reality is that sometimes there are exciting things that happen in the worlds of oceanography, even on a grand scale. The big iceberg heading toward South George Island I mean, it is 2020, so what, it's got another 20 days. It might even get there. So if it's going to hit, might as well hit in 2020 to make it this year. Okay, so that's about it for today. We're remote again next week, and for the time after that, make sure that you always log in to all of your classes every period. It's the same with this class, and I have to redesign what we're going to do because things are a little bit different. But there's the water cycle lab. If you haven't finished that yet, make sure not the water cycle lab. I'm in the wrong course. I don't even know why I just said that. I'm super tired too because I got up way too early. The wind and wave correlation activity, you got a little bit of time now, another 10 minutes or whatever. If you still need to work on that, but get that done today. That's open until midnight. And then the waves and tsunami thing, that's due Tuesday. We've gone over everything that's in that, but everything's in the book too. So that's it for now. If you want to go, have a nice weekend. Stay safe. If you have questions or you need help with something, you can stay. You can put questions in the chat, or you can turn your mic on. If you want to chat, you can chat either to everybody or chat just to me, and I can help you out. But otherwise, have a great weekend, and we'll see you on Monday.